Welcome to the Today Counts show. Today does count because it impacts, it influences your tomorrow and the day after that and the day after that. The Today Counts podcast is sponsored by the generous donors of the Lead Today community. I'm your host, Jim Piper.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Today Count Show. My name is Winston and I'll be your host today. And man, we have a good one for you. We'll be reflecting on the past year. And I don't know about you, but there's a lot to be thinking about, looking back on. And we're going to be looking back on the most powerful lessons of 2023. And I'm joined by the founder of Lead Today. I know him personally as game winner Jim from our time on the court together. He's a tremendous family man, father, husband, leadership coach, pastor, grandfather, all the above. My friend, Jim Piper. How are you today, Jim?
I am doing pretty good. I like that introduction. You're always so positive. You make me smile, and I appreciate you so much, Winston. I need, you're not really young anymore, but I need younger friends in my life, and you do qualify.
Thankfully.
Yeah, for that. And, I love this topic, and I really appreciate you being, in the host chair today. And you're really good at it. You're an amazing communicator. I love listening to you, whether it's casual conversation over chips and queso, or whether it's listening to you on the stage. A lot of the lessons that I've learned this year have actually come from this new venture, the Today Counts show. And I think what I'd like to do anyway is maybe start talking a little bit. I had fun with every podcast that I did, whether it was an interview with somebody or whether I'm kind of talking to myself and hoping that maybe somebody will listen to what I would be sharing. But Johnny Serpilla was one of my guests, episode 58 this year. And one of the things that he said and that he actually talked about a lot on that particular podcast has impacted me ever since. And he said, and I may not get it exactly, word for word, but he said that most conflict, now that caught my attention, Winston, because my phone rings, our ministry, our organization kind of kicks into gear, usually surrounded by some sort of conflict. And I personally don't view conflict as negative. I tend to thrive in it. I don't know why. Maybe it's because, it just kind of reminds me of sports, right? You're trying to get a goal and someone's trying to stop you. That's conflict.
Yeah. But have you always been that way?
I think I think I have. I don't know. I mean, it was the neighborhood ball games, right? And it was the playground. It was, I come from a competitive family. I remember when my dad was getting older and finally starting to lose on the basketball court, I saw him not take that so well. And so, yeah, I think it might be a family DNA thing, And, but when Johnny mentioned this, he said, most conflict is the result of insecurity.
Wow.
Obviously, he was not speaking of the athletic, conflict on who gets the most points. He was talking about leadership. He was talking about life. He was talking about relationships. He was talking about that kind of thing. And then he unpacked it. And so what that has done for me is, I feel inner conflict, many times. I'm going to be talking about this later. But I've been writing a lot about leading difficult people, most recently. And in that process, I have come to find that the most difficult person to lead is myself.
Wow.
So Johnny just kind of loosened that in my spirit, and I began to. So now when I fly somewhere, or when I get on a Zoom call or a telephone call, Johnny's coaching has helped me realize that maybe the thing I need to do in helping to bring some antidotes some assistance to a situation is to try to uncover the insecurity
That's
and
really
and to,
good.
right, and to recognize, oh, you know what, we're all insecure in one way or another. So what would happen if we actually, and we'll talk about that, but I wanted to mention Johnny Serpilla. Most conflict is the result of insecurity. Can you
It,
imagine? Yeah, go ahead.
well, I was just gonna say, and I had asked you that question about, do you feel like you've always, seen maybe conflict in a positive light? Because I myself, I feel like as a young leader, um, am learning to view conflict as something to be valued and in a positive way. But I wouldn't say that I've grown up in environments where conflict has been viewed positively. And I've heard it put this way: in order for us to be a great leader, we have to change confrontation's connotation.
Hmm.
So oftentimes we see conflict as a confrontation and a negative thing. Maybe it's a physical thing, or it's, I'm trying to impose my will on you. And ultimately in leadership, to your point, we're having to confront ourselves. We're having to confront the things that we're trying to, maybe hide, or we're trying to, project a certain image or a certain level of status that, we grew up a different way, right? Maybe like myself, you grew up without appropriate finances, and so maybe as you grow up, you want to overcorrect, and you want to project this image of wealth, when outwardly you may be wealthy, but inwardly you're not wealthy, right? And so there's all these different insecurities that we use conflict to try to create control, and try to impose our will on other people, versus conflict being more collaborative and being this space where I'm looking to work with somebody, and we might not agree on the same things, but through our ability to communicate and maybe empathize and being willing to hear somebody, and I'm being willing to hear somebody else, we come up with a new idea or a new way to go forward, versus me holding on to my control, me trying to prove something, me trying to, just get my agenda across. And that's, the space where I'm coming from, where I feel like conflict doesn't have to be that. And in fact, that isn't really conflict, right? That's pride at the end of the day. And so I just love that idea that, there are those of us who, maybe you just innately, gravitated towards conflict with, let me run towards the problem and be the solution. And then there maybe are those of us like me, where I'm coming from a different space, where I'm learning from somebody like you that conflict doesn't have to be negative, but it can be a positive.
Well, now that you mention it that way, let me rephrase, because no, I don't think I grew up seeing conflict as positive, but I think that in the athletic world, that's kind of the whole sport, right?
Yeah.
And but where you do see conflict begin in sport is inner conflict, lack of confidence, anger. You have an image to uphold, and sometimes you're not even aware of how you behave because your ego's been bruised. And then, of course, your own team will have differing views about how we should attack and what we should do. And so then, you get introduced to conflict that way. Of course, as a little boy, learning morals and doing things that are not within good moral ground, you learn about conflict that way, and you lie or you hide, or you do things like that. So that, once again, that kind of brings me back in my theology to the Garden of Eden, when Adam and Eve hid
Right.
from God right after they'd sinned. So no, I would say in that case, I had to do my Garden of Eden, experience myself, where I'm hiding from the truth. I'm not, looking at the fact that I lied or I stole or I did this or that. But that brings me to episode 90. So that's episode 58. If our listeners have not listened to episode 58 with Johnny Serpillo about conflict as a result of insecurity, I'd really encourage them to do that. But one of the most recent podcasts I did, which was a quite lengthy one, it was about an hour and a half, was with Clint Pease, a new friend and a client, episode 90. And he said something that when he said it, I made him say it again. And I think I made him say it again, and maybe I made him say it again. And I've been repeating it, and everywhere I go, in fact, I've been writing about it, as I said, And here's his quote, which was to me, a slap in the face. And it said, what you ignore becomes more, what you address becomes less. So it's kind of in the same line that, why are you ignoring this and that about, your own personal self or your team or your marriage or whatever? Because if you do, what you're going to reap from that is more of that. And of course, the assumption of that is negative, things you don't want. And then what you address becomes less. Just before getting on this podcast with you, Winston, I was speaking to a high level leader in Florida on a Teams video call, and they were reviewing with me some of their core values and how to present it and everything. And I didn't, I don't feel it's quite ready for presentation in a perfectionistic sense, but I encourage them to just keep going. And they said that it's a work in process. And I said, that's beautiful. You can present it as a work in process, because the labor of trying to define who we are and where we want to go and how we want to do it is a worthy thing in and of itself. So go. It doesn't have to be perfect. And I think that that's what I've learned even about writing. When I was in high school, I don't think I paid a whole lot of attention to English classes. I think I did fine in them because I just did the assignments and whatnot. But when I actually realized that in this life, you've got to write. If you want to learn, if you want to express, if you want to lead, you got to write. And when I took some of those college exams, I realized, my writing skills were not up to par. They just weren't. But I had someone who came along and who helped me. And what I mean by this story is that when I was able to say to somebody, I think I need to improve in my writing, one of the things he told me to do, he said, write. He just said, just start writing, and then I'll look over your shoulder and we'll look at this and we'll look at that. And that was extremely helpful. So, what you ignore becomes more, and what you address becomes less. Sometimes our insecurity, going back to the previous episode, keeps us from addressing, what we need to address. So that one is, that phrase right there is probably going to be in my next book. That's how big of an impact that has had on me. So that's another example.
And I love that, Jim, because it makes me think of another phrase I've heard similar. You can't change what you won't confront, especially for me, as a 30-something father, husband, leader, pastor. What I find personally challenging for myself, and I would imagine, for the culture we live in, and for those in my generation maybe, is the fact that we live in such a distracted culture that it becomes easy to ignore, whether it's insecurities. For some of us, it's awareness, and we don't even realize we're insecure about something because we're so inundated with our own thoughts or the content, or just chasing rabbit trails on social media or news or whatever it might be. And, where I feel like I land in this is I'm having to learn to fight for quiet. I'm having to learn to fight for margin, to even be aware enough that I'm ignoring something. And if I'm just constantly, just operating and, just waking up and going through the motions, I don't even know what to address. I know something's off. Maybe something's, off in a relationship, or something's off with a team or something. I know I can feel it, but I can't even put language to it sometimes because I'm so, fixated on the task or the thing that I'm doing, or just going from thing to thing to thing. And, I would imagine much of our culture is in that space. So what might you say to somebody, that finds themselves kind of just in that, that hamster wheel? They're just, cycling through, and they know something needs to be addressed, but they can't even really identify it.
That's a great question. And I think I it's funny that you asked that because I think I was just asked that yesterday and the day before that and the day before that. It seemed like this week I've had that same or very similar question asked of me. And it is the question that I deal with all the time. And you're familiar with this terminology. If I put it in a little different terms, the question that's usually asked of me once they learn this terminology is, how do I get out of quadrant one so that I can get into quadrant two? Quadrant one meaning important and urgent, and quadrant two meaning important and not urgent. But what I've learned is that when they get on that hamster wheel, as you call it, they can no longer even differentiate between what is quadrant one work and what is quadrant two work. If quadrant two work is anything, it's falling, collapsed, exhausted on the bed, or with a remote in hand, something like that. So, I'm going to give a short answer to it. It's a long process, but what I try to get them to is get back to one. What's one thing that you want to change, one thing that you're exhausted with, one thing that you want to take out to the trash, one thing, because usually that's what it usually has to start there. It usually has to start with taking something out to the trash because there's no room to add that one thing, even though that sounds good. They're going, well, now I'm just adding something to this chaos. Yep. So I usually go, what's the one thing? Now, sometimes it's put to me in a negative, right? Like the one thing, this shows how messed up we can get. The one thing that I need to get rid of is constantly canceling my date night with my spouse. I'm going, well, actually what you're saying is that you want to start dating your spouse again. So you're adding, but it was apparently on the calendar, but you have canceled it. So I have to kind of help them. If you see where I'm going, I have to kind of them backpedal and say, well, I'm not sure that really means anything. It sounds like maybe what you're saying is I've got to protect, or I've got to stop answering my phone or my text, or I haven't blocked time, or, so that creates a big old conversation,
right?
About that. But on the Strengths Finder, activator is one of my strengths. So I get that question, because one thing an activator does is they start stuff with good intentions. They're creative. I am creative. I'm a good starter, on things, and I kind of create this cycle when I look over at my life, and fortunately it's slowed down over the years. I'm hoping that that's through, wisdom and learning my lessons. But when I was younger, man, I would say every 7 years, I got myself in a big mess, meaning I was overcommitted to everything you could possibly think of. And they were all good things. But all those good things, I was drowning in all those good things, and I couldn't really look at anything that I was, getting done. I think we're going to have another podcast after this one, and I'm going to be talking about that a little bit more. But my short answer is one. It's just one. What is the step? What is the one step? And it might be grab that thing and throw it out. That might be, the step. And, another reason why I love my relationship with you is because you remind me of this next episode I want to talk about. Sherry Cole was the women's basketball coach at the University of Oklahoma. She's in the Hall of Fame now. She wrote a book that I read. I think it's entitled Root It to Grow. And it's behind me here in the bookshelf. So, those that are watching this podcast can't quite see the bookshelves, but the bookshelves behind me are kind of filled with what I call my one-step reach. That's only one step away from me grabbing it and referring to it. Now I've got books all over this house, and I have given away hundreds and hundreds of books. I've reduced my library. I tend to do it every time I physically move. But the library behind me has a specific purpose in my life. They're books that have had an impact on me to where I only want them one step away, where I can grab them, refer to something that I've highlighted before. I use them as reference. Her book, Root It to Grow, is in that collection behind me. And a quote from her that has stuck with me and that's messing me up is what she taught her girls, her athletes, is that she said, I'm going to do the paraphrased part first, and then I'm going to share the quote. She said, we need to play in such a way that when people come to watch us and they're walking to their cars, they say to themselves, I want to be a better me. And
That's good.
I thought, my word. So I'm already, right. I'm already picturing that, right? I'm picturing team members supporting one another, diving for balls, scrappy, celebrating, shaking things off. And this is her quote. After watching us play, we envision people saying to themselves as they walk out to their car, I want to be a better me. And that was episode 69, Sherry Cole. Powerful deal. Love her too. She's just down to earth, right? She doesn't have this professor, deal of, I don't know. Sometimes I'd ask her something, she'd go, well, shucks, Jim, I'm not sure. And she'd then envision herself in that situation. And, this is how I, might go about that. She definitely knows what she believes, but I really enjoyed that. In fact, I'll probably ring her doorbell again here in 2024 and see if I can see what she's up to now and see what we could learn from her.
It's so good.
Yeah, it is. It is. Another woman that I interviewed on our show was my sister, and episode 89. And I don't exactly remember what we titled it, but we were talking about mental health. We were talking about resiliency, toughness, and I started off the podcast by asking my sister this question. I said, it seems to me that we hear more about mental health than we have in past, decades. And I threw out a couple options. I said, is it because our culture is more open to the whole idea that there is a mental health concern issue? It's real. And I don't know if I gave her another thing to choose from because I couldn't really think of it. I couldn't think of anything. And she got pensive there for a minute, pondered, and she said, I've actually been thinking about that for a while. And she says, now remember, she is a psychiatric nurse practitioner. She has her own psychiatric practice in Arizona. And so, she works with a lot of people. She works with a lot of doctors. She works with a lot of programs. And she said, I think we're just not as tough as we used to be. I did not expect to hear that. And then she kind of logically, walked me through her mindset, the luxuries that we have today, the mindset that we have today of entitlement. Life should be easy. I can easily do this, or do that. She used the example of that she gets mad sometimes that she doesn't live in the same city as her grandchildren. And she said, there was a day where you may never, ever meet your grandchild, and you would send a letter by Pony Express and it would get there months later. And, there's just things that we have come to expect. That's episode 89. And I'll tell you, it just made me take another inventory, Winston, of all the blessings that we have, and maybe become more consciously aware that, I really am spoiled. I really might be softer than I want to admit. And maybe that's something, that I can work on. I don't go in the backyard and, punch myself in the face or anything, but maybe delayed gratification is something I need to reconsider. I need to look at disciplines. Maybe there's some things I just need to get out of my life that makes me softer. I don't know.
That's really good. That's something that I've been wrestling with. And I find myself in this place is that God doesn't owe me anything, right? In the gospel, it is that, right? Literally, we couldn't do anything for ourselves. And, Christ comes down, we have salvation through him. And, maybe this question resonates with some, but if all you had was salvation, would you be good? Like, if God didn't give you anything that you're praying for, if nothing gets better from now on, are you okay with being right with God? And to the point of entitlement, sometimes we find ourselves trying to bully God into getting what we want or expect our life to look like. And it's just a sobering reality, to your point of, that expectation for our life to look a certain way when there's nothing about us that warrants that life, right? There's nothing about who we are innately that we deserve to get what we think our life should look like. And to take it one step further, I'm preparing a message, and I'm kind of looking at biblical courage. And what's just so underrated in the scriptures, that courage is a command. It's not a suggestion.
Oh, wow.
Courage is a command. In Joshua 1, we see God
be courageous,
demand and command Joshua, in order to get the promise that was there for them. Courage had to be it had to be activated. And I think so often we operate in this space, to the point of entitlement, and to the point of our culture, we operate in a space where, fear is kind of like this little character flaw. And we're just like, I'm just, fear of failure, right? And it's like, fear is a sin. God doesn't play with fear. God does not deal with fear. He deals with power, love, and a sound mind, scripture says. And he says, your life should be marked with courage. If you are going to be set apart in this culture, courage is going to be that delineation. You're going to live a life of courage. If you're going to shift your generation, if your parents lived a certain way and your life is supposed to look a certain way, it's going to take courage. If your finances are going to be used in the way that God intended it, it's going to take courage. It's not going to take comfort. It's not going to take, you justifying, the means, whatever you're doing, right? It's going to take courage. And I just think it's so interesting to the point of mental health. Scripture says, through Christ, we can have a sound mind, but all the promises of God are connected to having courage and to make a choice, really, at the end of the day, to fight for the thing that God has promised us. He's not promised us necessarily an easier or better life, but he has promised us himself. And are we okay with just having him? And I think a lot of, to your point, the delayed gratification is we want more than what we deserve. And God has given us a gift. And are we okay with just having, him, being right with him, having his presence, and having the courage to live in that way?
I really like that statement you made, that God doesn't owe us anything, doesn't owe you anything. He doesn't owe me anything. And, I think about something else that, when you ask on the front end of this podcast, when we were talking about conflict, have you always been that way? Seen it in a certain way. One thing I think I have seen is I understand the theology of the marketplace. And it makes a lot of sense to me why, and I really think my clients are my colleagues, right? I mean, they're very successful business leaders. They're successful ministry leaders. They're successful nonprofit leaders. All of them are. But when you think about it, they work really hard and they bring in a profit, and then they have expenses and they have losses. And the whole idea is that they come out at the end of the year with profit, so you can kind of see this theology begin to develop. Well, if my good deeds outweigh my bad deeds and I come out on the other side with some profit,
right.
Then I'm good. And that can get ingrained, in you without taking a step back and really thinking about it and using terms, so sometimes, what we can do as a gift to the marketplace is, remind the marketplace that what grace and mercy are two different things. They're definitely in the same family, but they're two different things. If God is perfect and we are not, then what closes that gap? There's no amount of effort that can close that gap. So there is kind of a courageous idea where you step into that and you start asking yourself the question, how is that if there is life after death, then how is that gap closed? I have actually had clients say to me, saved from what? You talked about salvation. You threw that word out. And they say, saved from what? Winston, that question itself tells you that we have disengaged from the fact, the soon coming reality that we're going to die.
Right.
Well, I would say saved from death. And then naturally they'll look at me and go, who has been saved from death? So they're thinking of the first death. They're not thinking of the second death. They're not realizing that, this is really what the work of Christ is. And so that's a pretty powerful business thing actually to think about. If you think about what is God in the business of doing, he's in the business of distributing grace to giving us what we do not deserve, what we cannot earn. This is what God is in the business of doing. Maybe think about getting in his business, and becoming a recipient of his business. Since I mentioned, or we kind of implied life after death, episode 68, I think is entitled The Afterlife. And I had a discussion there with one of my professors of long, long ago, Dr. Mark Strauss. And I just thought that was an amazing exposition of or exegesis, I guess would be a better term, of the totality of Scripture and what it does teach and what it doesn't teach, and the things that we know and the things that we don't know about the afterlife. If somebody's looking for black and white answers, that's probably not the episode to listen to. But if they want to get a grander view of God and all the possibilities, that might be something that they would want to consider and look at. But I got to tell you, Winston, about one, and this podcast actually wasn't done in 2023. It was done in 2022, but it lived on beyond that because it did get into my book that's coming out in Q1 2024. But I was working with Aaron Porteous, who is the CEO of the Boys and Girls Club of Metro Denver. And we were working on her values. I thought we were going to need to do some work on her values. And I actually met somebody on the front end who already knew their values, were exercising their values, creating culture with their values, and really recruiting, wooing, if you will, and then shaping her leadership team with these values. And I just want to mention them really, really quickly because, they're values that I would embrace, but I just love the simplicity of her values. And I would say she definitely lives by them. She is a down-to-earth gal. I think her mom was a school teacher and her father was a firefighter. And so here are her 4 values: hard work, humility. These are such ground level values that who doesn't appreciate these? Hard work, humility, humor, honesty. Hard work, humility, humor, honesty. And I just think, I don't have the episode here listed, but it won't be hard to find. That'll be in 2022. So she's had an impact, on me in having values of that kind of power, where they go from theory to, man, this is who I am. This is what I'm looking at. I want to give a shout out to episode 53. I'm not going to get into the details, but two people that you and I both know very well, Matt and Jennifer Martin, I interviewed them on Second Chair Leadership, and it is the number one listened to podcast in the history of the Today Count show. And I know for a fact that though their context is religious work, church work, not nonprofit work, I know for a fact that people from all sectors have listened to it because they've told me so, and how much they have appreciated. Here's another one. I got to give you these. the story of life change. I met a young man by the name of Elijah, and he was from Africa, and we talk about his struggle. He was a football player, division. I want to say Division One. I might be wrong about that, but he was a high level football player. He had plans of going pro. A lot of that didn't happen. He talked about how he met a coach and how that coach got him to church and how that completely changed his life. And now he is a successful executive. That's episode 66. It's a lot of fun. Actually, it's kind of a collaboration. His coach is on that podcast along with Elijah and myself. I had already mentioned to you about Dr. Mark Strauss. A couple more real quick. Dr. Glenn Schultz, episode 70. If you've heard the term worldview, I think Dr. Schultz did a really good job talking about what is a worldview, why is it important, and you may not even realize that your behavior is the result of your worldview. And even more so, you may not even know what worldview you have.
That's really good.
Yeah,
That's
so
really good.
That one is they were all good, but just the things that grabbed me. All right, well, let me end with this one. So this is a monologue, so it feels weird. It's self-promoting, but I did a monologue that I called "Raising Kids Who Win." And anybody who has kids, anybody who is a parent or a grandparent, a youth worker, I would really encourage you to listen to my heart and my experience. I don't think I approach this topic like, here's all the great things that I did. There's some things that I did well, and there's some things that I could have done a lot better. But now as a grandfather of 7, I really think that episode 75, Raising Kids Who Win, is a really good podcast to probably listen to, once or twice a year. Crazy, but that's what I believe.
Yeah, I think now more than ever, especially as a father now of a 2-year-old who is a fireball, never stops, foot on the gas pedal. Her favorite thing is, let's go, Dada. That's her new thing now. It's like we're just always going somewhere. And just, to some of the stuff that we've even talked about, today, now more than ever, the need for parents to parent, the need for mothers and fathers to take ownership of what has God given me in this child? What is my responsibility to God and to this child for them to live the life that, that God has purposed for them. And so, I just can't, thank you enough, Jim, for sharing your heart on parenting and just this generation now more than ever. There's so much trying to conform children, to your, note with Dr. Glenn Schultz, worldviews. We want to make sure that our children have the right worldview. And so that is just a gem, priceless content that I think is going to, live beyond just this podcast, but that content is going to echo through eternity. So I thank you, for having the courage, if you will, to share that with those who are willing to listen to it. So, man, what a great conversation we've had today. I love just hearing your heart, Pastor Jim, the biggest lessons you've taken away in 2023, and so much more to talk about, but we'll keep it for another time. I know I'm better from today, and for those of you who are listening, and I hope you are too. So we'll see you next time, and thank you so much for joining us on the Today Counts show.
If I could say goodbye this way, when I look at your little girl, Brooklyn, and one thing I see in her is a will, right? She's got a will. We all do. She's got a will, and I thought to myself, man, what would happen if her will was given to the things of God? What a powerful, precious, idea. And that's what we're fighting for, right? But thank you for hosting this podcast, Winston. I appreciate it. If you're not part of the Lead Today community, let me invite you. Go to leadtodaycommunity.com. That's leadtodaycommunity.com. www.mondaymoments.com and sign up for Monday Moments. It's a weekly email that will encourage your leadership. Again, thank you for joining us today, and thank you for telling a friend about the Today Counts show.